Good morning, everybody. David Dulany here with another series in the Sales Development Mastermind webinar series. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We're starting to see the attendees join. We're right at 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And I am joined today by Mr. Brett Morris, the CEO of Perception Predict. Brett, how are you doing today?
Great, David. Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent, excellent. And I know that Brett is between hotels and meetings and doing a million things. So we don't get to see your lovely face today on the video, but we appreciate you putting together some information. We're going to be talking about a subject that is near and dear to my heart because I think it's a problem that I see every day at Tenbound, going from company to company, working with different SDR teams, different stakeholders, different folks, trying to put the best possible team on the ground and really struggling to balance the scarcity of talent that's out there in the marketplace for this position with recruiting the A players that you absolutely have to get on the team in order to be successful. And I wanted to talk with Brett about it because this is something that you are immersed in, on a daily basis. And your company's really focused on trying to help people solve this conundrum. Brett, if folks are not aware of your company and what you do and how you got into the business, can you give us a little background?
Yeah, I'd love to. And immersed is a good word because it feels like 24/7 immersion. So originally from Auckland, grew up in Auckland, went to University of Auckland, did a undergrad science major there. And when I left there, I got into, actually went out and moved to Australia, work in that career field, but only for a few months, just long enough to convince me that was not a good career choice. And then I got into sales, actually into telesales, or that's what we called it at the time. It was really a combination of an SDR AE role. But yeah, back then we used to call it telesales, and worked in that for a couple of years and essentially doing outbound work selling training events and training systems. And so that was a really great introduction to how to sell, because that was a tough field, probably still is. From there, sort of got into field sales and eventually migrated into consulting and did Salesforce optimization consulting for, 15 plus years with medium and large size enterprises. And it was at a stage, particularly in the 90s, where we were trying to introduce new technology like CRM systems and so on, and try and technology enable selling. I mean, that process continues today, but with tools that are infinitely more advanced. And when I got started doing that, there was no cloud infrastructure. It was well before, Salesforce.com came out in 2000, 2001. So that was an interesting period and interesting in terms of how you try to leverage a Salesforce. So I've had the privilege of being able to work with sort of literally hundreds of different Salesforces across lots of different industry verticals and figure out how to optimize them. From there, I got into venture. Spent about a dozen years as a general partner in a venture firm, managing money and on the buy side, investing in early stage information and communications technology businesses, which we were trying to scale globally. And back in those early 2000s days, there were, again, lack of infrastructure. You can do today 10 times more, with a lot less money than it took to scale a digital business back then. Then about 5 years ago, one of the issues that we'd constantly come across in Salesforce was this pervasive disconnect between hiring and performance. People would get hired, some would perform, some wouldn't. It was like, surely there must be a better way of trying to figure this out, because eventually after about 12 or 18 months, you'd have a failure rate that was around the 50 to 60% mark, which seemed like crazy. Any other corporate process that had that level of failure rate, you'd think someone would be all over it. So we set out 5+ years ago to figure out how to actually predict actual performance in a sales role pre-hire. Yeah, so here we are today, with working on that, and deployed a global system that is enabling us to do that in a number of different areas. But our roots are in sales, and in sales performance.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, there's been a pattern over the last, I would say, ever since we came out of the last recession, where a company would have at least in the SaaS business, they would have a product and they want to go to market. So one of the first things that they do is hire a bunch of SDRs to start doing all the calling and trying to set up the appointments. And there's a huge demand in the marketplace to hire people and get them in. But at the same time, as an SDR leader, you're responsible for the performance of the team. And so if you don't have the best possible team in place, it becomes a huge issue. I want to really dive into, I'm sure everyone on the call is grappling with one of these, otherwise we wouldn't have jumped in. But Brett, what are some of the issues that you see out there as you go from, different SDR teams and different sales teams?
Yeah, what we see as being sort of the core underlying problem or thesis behind the problem is that the way in which you evaluate and select sales talent is hugely inefficient and inaccurate, and it plays into some real economic inefficiencies. One of the critical ways this plays out is specifically in the way in which people's beliefs and biases play into the way we select people. And if we're able to get a better handle on those biases and replace them with data, it can deliver a really significant advantage to a company and a sales team, literally enable you to build a proprietary competitive advantage around the sales team. So just an example of the sort of the bias, one particular client almost didn't hire their best SDR producer. And the reason for it is that during the hiring process, during the interview process, the guy, and it was, in this case, it was a he, was deeply introverted. And the VP of sales says, well, what are we hiring this guy for? He can hardly put two words together. Well, it turns out that when he actually got hired and got trained, he was exceptional in terms of his process skills, his discipline, his cadence, his ability to use all the tools together and then communicate with people through the various, channels by which he was connecting with them. And so his production of qualified meetings was outstanding. He was, number one, and not just by a small margin, but by a big margin.
That's amazing. And just it real quick, it reminds me of the old Moneyball. There's this book called Moneyball, and it's I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's about the revision of the Oakland A's. And the old way that they used to recruit people was literally if someone looked like a baseball player. That was one of the things. And it was so biased that, the coaches would say, oh, well, he looks like a baseball player, so he must be good, right? They started to replace that with, well, let's actually dig in on the data of what makes someone a good baseball player and then correlate that to what we need right now on the team. And it completely turned things around. So that's really interesting. I think we do that as well in sales development, where it's like, well, I mean, the resume looks good, person's well-spoken, they're bright, let's get them in. And then you never know what you're going to get.
Yes, exactly. And as a result of those biases, you end up with a lot of inconsistency in terms of how selection and hiring decisions are made. And this contributes to turnover and to soft, hard and opportunity costs, like hopefully you can see on screen, where you end up with culture viruses that are a poor fit, you get turnover. All of this is costing, money all the way through. You get people that ramp slowly or maybe don't ramp at all. They burn leads, they burn sales, and there's a real significant cost to this. And if you cost it out, the dollars are run into the millions if you've got a sizable team. And
and you're looking at that going, God, what happened? I mean, they interviewed so well. They had all the right characteristics, and now I've got this, we're losing leads, we're losing opportunities. And, you know, even on the extreme, like you said, there's a culture virus. So you're
Yeah.
just sitting there scratching your head. So, yeah.
So the other thing that, of course, on the other side of the coin that plays into sales leaders and recruiters trying to find and recruit SDRs, that in certain markets you've got what it appears to be like a bit of a scarcity. So you have some, you know, sourcing is always an issue, but you know, trying to get enough of the right people, particularly in certain markets, can be difficult. But that can also compromise our decision making, particularly if we've got a biased view of what makes a good SDR. If we're not clear or you know exactly what exactly are we looking for, and consequently some good fish get missed. And I relate sourcing like fishing. You go out to the fishing ground. Hopefully you're in the right grounds with the right place with the right tackle and the right bait, and you're really trying to identify the sort of fish that you want. But unfortunately, you end up with occasionally making decisions around people simply because you need to fill a seat. And whilst this might not be a written criteria, you sometimes got the sense that you might take anyone that can fog a mirror. So that can end up with, you know, you solve one problem in terms of filling a seat, but you create another one with a problem higher.
Right. And if you can monitor the data and use the data to really hone in on what's going to be successful, it could be completely different than the pool of applicants that you've been looking at. And you could find that you do need that introverted, you know, more research process oriented person, which could open up an entirely, you know, new fishing ground in your analogy. It could open up a new set of candidates. If you open your mind, maybe we need someone with more experience. Maybe we can hire stay-at-home moms or you know, a whole different group. Getting outside of that one lane of the stereotypical SDR that you hire. You have that opportunity to actually increase the sourcing pool.
Yes, we think the talent pool, the SDR, the potential SDR talent pool, is actually hugely wider than it's currently been seen as, and that there is significant opportunity to hire out that pool when you've got the data that can tell you what a great performer could look like or does look like. And right now, the prevailing, you know, often we get asked, you know, who's your major competitor around the globe? And my answer is intuition. That's who we tend to compete with because that's the number one prevailing technology that people use to make, you know, evaluation and selection decisions. They might obviously be using data from a resume and background and education and so on. But the problem with intuition is, and by the way, I'm not recommending that we get rid of it. No one would take that recommendation seriously anyway, because intuition is incredibly powerful, but it's also valuable when we know how to apply it in the right way. The problem with it is it's inconsistent. It works well one day and not the next. It works well on one person and not the next. But also, just as there are better natural athletes and better natural musicians, there are also people who have better natural intuition in terms of making selection decisions. And but for a lot of us, most of us, in fact, including me, it's too inconsistent. And because we don't necessarily have the right data to match with the intuition, we end up missing gems, and we too often hire liabilities that don't last, don't ramp, don't perform. And when we do occasionally, on occasion, we do use certain maybe cookie cutter tools. You know, they tend to be one size fits all. And what I mean by cookie cutter is that they're unable to distinguish the unique or complex characteristics that enable a person to perform in a specific job role, such as a SDR, BDR, ADR type role. There are specific, unique and complex characteristics that are contributing to performance. And if you know what those are and you marry that data with your intuition, you're going to make consistently better decisions, but not a game of perfect.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and it's interesting because the advice that I give to clients is at least make an ideal candidate profile when you're talking to your candidates. So we always make an ideal customer profile when we're doing outbound, cold calling. We don't want to waste time calling on the wrong people, but also make an ideal candidate profile. But that's just the first level. I mean, I think everybody on the call hopefully has an ideal candidate profile so they know who they want on their team, but we've got to go a level deeper, I think, and that's what you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and I think that is too often missing. As you say, what really helps is if we can get some data around obviously having a clear target. And to us, a clear target is really understanding what's the performance trait, what's the DNA, the makeup, the characteristics, the attributes that constitute a good performer. What do they look like? What does an A player look like? What's the makeup? And then if you can remove some of the bias and some of the intuitive biases that go into the way we, evaluate and select people, we can take those performance traits and match them with actual performance data. And if we're specifically talking about, an SDR role, actually, how many qualified meetings are actually produced? What traits are producing what level of qualified meetings, qualified opportunities? And if you can marry those two together, you can end up with a success fingerprint for an SDR, and that starts to give you the basis of a selection intelligence system.
Got it. Okay. And as you go on there, Jeff Haber just wrote in on a question. Hey, Jeff, thanks for tuning in today. He's writing, how can we predict performance when someone hasn't actually done the job? Because there's a lot of people out there who want to get into this, but they haven't actually done it. What's their criteria, etc.? That's what he's looking for. His team is all outliers. They've got the fresh college grad, former school teacher, car salesman. The talent pool is wide. He agrees with that. So, and I think we go into this a little bit, Brett. But anything off the top of your head, how do you predict that performance when they're coming in cold?
Yeah, and if you look at the SDR role, it's an entry-level sales role that, for the most part, most people coming into it don't have any sales experience. They may be a fresh college grad, or they've got, they worked at TGIFs, which is good experience, but not necessarily. It may not necessarily be specifically sales experience. In fact, just on that point, any early job experience is actually very valuable. Early stage job performance does correlate with later job success. So if you're seeing that on someone's resume, it is a valuable input. But yeah, we are going to cover that point about how do you build a success fingerprint that allows you to identify people that can be really great SDRs that have no sales experience whatsoever, and that allows you to, with whatever field they come from, to be able to predict how successful they might be.
Awesome. Okay, let's dive in. Let's see what it is.
Okay, so what and what I'm going to share with you is something you can actually do yourself. So I'm going to give you a do-it-yourself model about how you can pursue this, and then also obviously introduce you to some tools that can actually supplement that process for you. So really in terms of building a success fingerprint, we're really combining talent science. And talent science there's 100 years of reliable and predictive talent science, but most of it, in fact, is so dense, so impenetrable for the average individual in business, that to try and make sense of it and then convert it into practical tools that you can use every day is really tough. You read some of the research papers, they'll put you in a coma very quickly. But it's brilliant research, and that'll helps you understand how certain attributes play into performance. You combine that with data science, put the two things together, and you've got the opportunity to build a intelligence system around specific job roles, because there are different attributes of creating performance in different job roles. And if you're using a cookie cutter approach, it'll give you an across the board look at across lots of different sales roles, but not specific sales roles. And we think that there's a real need to understand it at a specific job level. So with that in mind, how would you go about doing it yourself? So the first thing you do, as we've been talking about, is what are the performance traits? So you might get together with some of, the team, get the sales leaders together, maybe one-on-one, or maybe, workshop it face-to-face or virtually, and just get those sales leaders to do a bit of a dump around what do they think are the traits that are contributing to performance in that SDR, your specific SDR role. Now, once you pull all those out and you've got that list, one of the things you might ask those sales leaders is, what do you think we've got now? And of course, they're going to say, well, hey, we've got a list of what we think are the performance traits. What you've also got a list of is their biases. And what's interesting at this point is and there's been a couple of interesting instances where we've done this process with sales leaders, and then we've taken their SDRs and gone further into the process and compared what the sales leaders thought were the attributes, and that they'll say things like, we want extroverted, outgoing people that are sociable and team players, and they're charismatic. And what we find is that some of the best performers are not team players. They're loners. They're introverted. They're not charismatic. But boy, can they produce qualified meetings. And so that difference between what you think. So one of the things you need to do then and next is test those traits. So you want to measure them in the current team, for example. So you might and put this in a, you can use an XLS or you can use other tools if you've got them, but take those traits that you pull out of that sales leadership team and actually measure them. To what extent, I'll put them on a 1 to 6 scale, 1 to 7, 1 to 10 scale, and rate those particular traits. And you might have 8 traits or 12 traits or 15 traits. It might be things like emotional intelligence and resilience and other traits. So measure them in the current team, put them into an XLS, and then together with that, then capture actual team performance data. So and specifically, how many calls and outreaches are individual making. You can even build in the cadence of that. So there's a lot of granular data that you'll be capturing in your particular CRM system, and be, you can even, if you want to you can connect it straight into your Salesforce system or whatever. Take that particular data around calls and meetings and opportunities, and put that into your XLS, and then the next thing to do is to run a correlation analysis between them, which you can readily do in an XLS. This is not an easy job, but it is this is the discipline you need to go through to actually really understand which performance traits are actually producing high levels of qualified meetings.
And Brett, if I could ask a quick question. So you met with the sales leadership and you polled the company, basically asking, what are the performance traits that you see in top performers here? And you pull that out of them. Now that may or may not be accurate, but you've polled them to get that. And then you're measuring that against the current team. Are you also trying to dig into your current team, and especially the successful people on your current team, to pull out, 2 or 3 traits that they have that might be going against what the sales leaders and the people in your company are giving you, and then running a correlation analysis against all those traits against their team performance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Exactly. You're enlarging that pool of potential traits and testing that against actual performance data. So not just relying on what you think the sales leaders think are the performance traits, but adding to that mix some additional ones that you also believe that could be contributing.
Got it.
And so from the scale, and I'll give you a look at what that might look. So imagine if we were going to take those performance traits and run them against performance data, it might look something like this. So in this particular case, we've got on this axis, we've got qualified meetings. the performance trait that we think is contributing to performance is emotional intelligence. And as it turns out, there is a positive correlation with that. And I'll dig into that a little bit. Or you might take qualified meetings and compare it with one of the things you mentioned, David, was maybe looking at high performance. One of the things that we think is important is you need to look at across the entire team. You don't only want to understand what high performers look like. You need to understand what low performers look like as well, so you can avoid them. And that means understanding if you can understand what a liability hire looks like, and you can identify it before you hire, that clearly is going to play a significant advantage to you. So literally here, what you're doing is you're taking two different variables, a performance variable and a trait variable, and you're doing a correlation where you're saying, what is the strength of the relationship between those two variables? Is it negative or is it positive? And both positive and negative are both valuable. If there's none, clearly that's not valuable. So just taking this example of the emotional intelligence, here's an example of it. So what our data shows, and this is just from one particular team, but this also holds up against multiple teams, is that when you compare emotional intelligence with qualified meeting performance, it actually correlates very weakly. And what this is saying, what the data is saying, is that while sales leaders might be saying, and there are a number of people, I'll call them amateur commentators who love to think that actually emotional intelligence is critical in SDR, our data is suggesting it's not, that there is in fact a very weak correlation between emotional intelligence and qualified meeting performance. Now, there are a bunch of other things that do correlate strongly, but emotional intelligence is not one of them. So each of the dots in this thing represent an individual on the team. And of course, if there's any people out there that are strong on stats, you'll also be wanting to know what the p-value, the confidence level on that is. I haven't shown it here because I didn't want to do too deep a dive. But one of the things that we also look like when we're working this is understanding what level of confidence can we have in the statistical analysis. So out of this, we're trying to find between the traits and actual performance, qualified meeting performance, what's called the correlation coefficient, called R. How strong is it? Anything but, between, is it up to 1 or -1? We're looking for it, and very rarely do you ever hit those numbers. And consequently, if you can understand the traits that are correlating with actual qualified meeting performance, and you can strip out the ones that aren't, you end up with the ability to build a success fingerprint, what we call an SDR success fingerprint. So you'll have a custom fingerprint as to the performance traits that work for your particular team, and implicit within that, you're also able to build in an implicit correlation with your buyer personas, because different traits in different SDRs correlate with different buyer personas. So that's
Brett, a quick question there for you is, where do you come up with the initial traits? Say you get some traits from polling the company, and then you get some traits from your team. How many traits is a good list to have when you're initially setting out to do this?
Well, if you were doing this yourself and you had 15 or 20 traits that you were testing, that would be a pretty good list to test. More is better, because you really don't know until you do the correlation analysis how many are actually going to perform. Because we're doing it through a ready built platform, we're able to put in 80 to 100 different traits down to a very granular level, and run single and multiple regression analysis of those traits against actual multiple performance data points.
Yeah, that's what I want to get into. Like, you guys, so this is what you do on a daily basis. Unless there's some pretty savvy, Excel users on the call, or statisticians, someone's hobby is statistics. How do you guys do it, and what does your system look like to process all this information?
Yeah. Okay. So what this is an example of what
Great.
the performance traits might look like an SDR. You know, whether they're an employee now or whether they're a candidate. These are some of the. Now, this is just an executive summary of obviously of the traits and the measurement of them.
Okay.
There are actually a bunch more that sit underneath it, but this is a good a good headline summary. Now, what I'm sharing with you now is not actually the traits that play into performance in an SDR. That's kind of a trade secret, so I'm not in a position to reveal those. But these particular traits, desirable and undesirable traits, are for another sales role. And we measure when we're looking at, so we have a science team. They look at a role, they strip it apart, and they hypothesize what do they think are the traits that are potentially playing into performance. And then we walk through the same process that I shared with the participants here is what's actually correlating with performance. One of the things that we do is we don't just focus on the desirable traits, but we're also interested in what are the traits that we don't want to find in that might be compromising performance. And so we have a look at those. So that gives you an idea of the sort of traits that at a headline level that we measure across a very broad front. And then we'll combine that with qualified meeting performance data, and we'll end up, and here's an example of some of them, for example. Work ethic, for example, correlates strongly with qualified meeting performance. So we're taking a measure of the work ethic, correlating it with qualified meetings, finding out that it's got a good correlation, and then all of these different predictors then come together in the form of a fingerprint. And that fingerprint can then be run on all your inbound SDR candidates. So literally you've got a way of automating the evaluation of all candidates from any background, regardless of their education or their experience or whatever. And we call that attributes first selection. So rather than drilling into doing phone screens and maybe screening out some gems, and before you get into resumes and education and background, all of which have a low predictive validity, you can take your fingerprint, you can run it against all your candidates, and it'll tell you, the data will tell you whether you've got someone who has the potential to be a good performing SDR.
Yes, and this is why I wanted to talk to you, because the way that things are run now in a lot of SDR teams is it's the very stereotypical approach of recruiting, and it's taking up tons of time. It's not predictive of getting A players, and it's not data forward like this. And so the benefits of this is amazing, because you're going to save time on not having to deal with all these unqualified candidates that won't do a good job for your team. Your team is going to get better, and you're going to open your pool of candidates to like what Jeff said in the question. I mean, he's got people from fresh college grads to more experienced people and all over the board, just because they're the ones that can contribute to the success of the team. So
yeah, precisely. So the savings in terms of compressing the time to hire, finding the right people, spending time on those that have the potential to be good hires is tremendous, and also particularly avoiding liabilities. We talk about trying to find A players, but avoiding liabilities has got huge benefits. Because when you've got a liability, the difficulty of dealing with them in a team, managing them, even managing them out, is difficult. And it's no fun for the candidate either. No fun for the person who's on a team and is struggling and who really is not well fitted for the role. It's no fun for them either. So it doesn't work for either party. But what we find is when we pull this together in our own particular fingerprint, it looks like this. So in this particular SDR one, there are a number of different factors that are contributing at a very high level of correlation, and these nearly 20 of them coming together, and this fingerprint forms an algorithm, and the algorithm then runs pre-hire on the applicant stream, and it's looking for these attributes in someone who, could any background, anywhere, you can evaluate them. And by way of comparison, our cutoff is a 0.2 correlation, and if you a coin toss in terms of its correlation with actual performance is zero. And the regular interviews that most of us are doing every day has a correlation against performance of about 0.2. So everything we use is better than 0.2. So when you put all these together and you've got 15 to 20 of them, what you're doing is increasing the probability of making a better decision. And
yeah, this is sorry. I just picture an SDR manager starting a new SDR using data and correlation versus the interview process. And, the SDR, it doesn't look like the usual SDR, has a completely different profile. And the VP of sales comes up and goes, why the hell did you hire that person? And just pulling out this report and going, data,
yeah,
stop him in his tracks.
and exactly. And this is an evidence-based management. It's using data and evidence to predict actual performance. And if you use an approach like this, you're literally able to predict in an SDR candidate how many qualified meetings they can produce before you hire them. Based on what's right for your operation. Is it 10 a month, 20 a month, 30 a month, whatever it is. You can actually measure that pre-hire. And you're not going to get it right, but you're not getting it right now. You're not going to get it right. You're just going to get it right more often, which we think is particularly valuable.
Excellent.
So this is when you put it all together in the perception predict approach, we're able to provide that sort of qualified meeting prediction. If a recruiting recruiter or hiring manager wants to dig into all the data and the reporting, it's pretty rich. They can if they want, or they might just want to look at a headline summary that says this is someone we should hire. Now, in our particular model, we measure SDR as an entry-level model, but at the same time, we also give them an AE score. So we're also measuring their level of promotability, so that if they succeed as an SDR, and general tenure for an SDR is around 14 months. But if they perform well, you're also able to see how promotable they are into an AE role, because we're also tracking. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's oftentimes the lip service at a company is, hey, our SDR team is going to be the bench strength for the AE team. But if, as an SDR leader, if you're not making your number and your team is not producing, then nobody cares about the bench strength thing anymore. Like, that goes out the window. They're only focused on, did you make your number? If you made your number and everything's looking good, then, oh yeah, and by the way, I have a really strong bench strength for the AE team. But if it's reversed, you're in trouble. So
yeah, and when it works well, it works really well, and you really then have built a real competitive strength around that whole, from sales development into AE. So yeah, and this is just a quick snapshot of the platform that we use. So clients are using it. They got inbound candidates. They get an immediate snapshot. They can dive into the detail if they want, but otherwise, you got an inbound candidate, you get a headline summary, and this across different roles, and it provides an immediate prediction geared to particular. And
one quick thing on that was, I noticed that the language was English, but is that an Australian flag or a New Zealand flag?
Yeah, that particular that particular one's an Aussie flag. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. It's usually either a Union Jack or a Stars and Bars. So I'm glad that we're mixing it up a little bit there.
Yes. Yeah, and we're having a lot of fun with being able to assist companies, around the planet on helping them with this particular. There's a lot of people that we think that this SDR, BDR, SDR, ADR role is clearly an entry level role, but it's an opportunity role for a lot of people to figure out whether this is a career for them. And if we can help, select more people more effectively, it offers a career opportunity for a lot of people who might right now being biased out because they don't look right or walk right or talk right or sound right. But in fact, they've got the psychological makeup to be very effective in the sales arena.
Yeah. Oh my God. Somebody who's one of the best practitioners in sales development is a good friend of mine named Ryan Reisert, who runs a company ironically called The Sales Developers. And you guys should meet because he is very bought into this approach that you're taking. And in just a short time of running the company, he's been able to hire a team that, maybe doesn't exactly fit into the stereotype, but they are crushing it. And I think it really goes into, using the data and being more deliberate in the selection. So
Yes, from what I understand, those guys are doing a really great job.
awesome.
And this, yeah, just in final, when we put this all together, what we're saying is, you can automate your attribute screening up front and sort out the A players from the liabilities, compress your time to hire and spend, the recruitment processing time on the people that have got a chance to make it, and then get them in and on board and train them and ramp them. And one key thing is that with the system that we use, we actually track people's performance once they're hired, and we feed that performance data back into the predictive system. So with SDRs, we're reloading the performance data every 90 days and rerunning the predictive algorithm to refresh it, so that we're incorporating the actual success of new hires into the algorithm on an ongoing basis. So there's a consistent recalibration going on.
That's amazing. I mean, it's one of those things, build or buy, I mean, there's definitely area for trying to build this and do it. But Brett, the system is just amazing, especially the fact on tracking performance that it integrates with Salesforce. So you can see how they actually do and then run it back in. And I just got a question, Brett, as we're wrapping up here, from Frederick. He said, what is your ideal customer profile for your company at Perception Predict?
Yeah, we're helping everyone from really small startups. So, for example, in terms of getting started with a new client, we're able to help a small startup that might have 50 or 100 people, and literally for a few thousand per annum subscription, they can have access to all the science and all of the platform out of the box, and they can literally apply it almost immediately to screening all of their SDR applicants, all the way up to medium larger enterprises that have got built existing teams. They might have 100, 200 SDRs and or more, but they've got they've got turnovers of a fact of life, and they're replacing people, and they're looking to continuously improve and amp up the performance of the team. So we're working with them. So to Frederick's question, that ideal profile, we're able to help all of them because the scalability of our system allows us to gear it up or down and implement it quickly. Some of the larger teams, sometimes they want to get a little nuanced, and we're able to develop custom configurations, custom, if you will, fingerprints for their particular team, because different SDRs play into different buyer personas. So
Nice.
there's no one clear answer to Frederick's question, but hopefully that helps.
Yeah, anybody who's hiring, I like how you can get it out of the box or customize it as you get bigger. And everybody, we'll send out a quick email after with Brett's contact information. You're going to have it here as well. If you want to get in touch with him, talk more about this. Brett, I had one other question from Jeff. Jeff, thanks for the questions. Frederick, thanks so much for tuning in. Where does leadership style factor in? It's such a vital element to the SDR success. So say, you know, I can only think of sports analogies, but nobody's going to know these. Bill Walsh versus Vince Lombardi. You're not going to even know what I'm talking about. You know, if you're a brash, you know, extroverted leader versus if you're an introverted leader who's more data heavy, where does that factor into the whole process?
Yeah, and it can play a real role. And you know, who doesn't know the legend of Vince Lombardi?
Okay, I never know.
Yeah, well, hey, you know, and it's a good point. But
Yeah.
One of the things that this is not a game of perfect. It's a game of probabilities that we're trying to improve our decision making. So when we're looking at predicting actual performance, there are many things that go into whether someone performs in a particular job role. We're focused here in what we've been talking about in terms of performance on the performer themselves and looking at the individual, and they're the strongest contributor to performance. But there are other factors like leadership and environment and hygiene factors and other things that are playing into performance. As we go forward, we're actually going to be building in a measurement of the leadership factor and how that's actually influencing performance also. But right now, that's not included in what we do. But it is a key factor. And you know, a good leader versus a poor one is going to make a difference. The coach, the leader, makes a difference. And to what extent, that's an area that we are very keen to measure and include in the system.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, really, you could kind of, if you're a director that's managing, you know, 2 or 3 managers, or you're a VP and you've got a bunch of directors, I mean, you can kind of use the same DIY formula that Brett went through and on any set of direct reports that you have and just use different factors and different success measures. But hopefully, Brett, you guys will build it out of the box at some point, and we can just apply it in that respect as well. So
Yes, yeah, it's under development.
awesome. Awesome. Well, I mean, this has been really enlightening. This is going to be available over at the Tenbound YouTube channel and on the Bright Talk channel as well. And we'll get a file over to you, Brett, so if you guys want to post it. I think, you know, I've learned a ton, and it's been exciting learning more about what you do. If anybody, you know, needs help with their sales development program and they want to look at strategy and tactics, Brett gave me a little shout there. Give me a call at Tenbound, and that's what we do. We do consulting and training for sales development teams. And like I said, I'll put Brett's contact information in an email, and we'll get the recording posted ASAP so you can go back and take notes.
And thank you, David, for having me on the show. It's been good to talk. And if anyone wants to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn, Brett Morris, Perception Predict. You'll just throw me out a connection request, and happy to do so.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
Thank you.